Hello, welcome everyone to Design Perspectives, MillerKnoll's monthly broadcast where we talk about all things design. Today we have Joseph White, the Director of Design Strategy, Global Research and Insights for MillerKnoll, on to share our newest CEU on redefining the workplace. The CEU is accredited with both AIA and IDCEC and is certified with HSW credit. We will send certificates of completion and submit your AIA and IDCEC attendance within the next 5 business days. When you registered, you should have provided your email and AIA and/or IDCEC numbers. It is important that you join from your own device rather than a shared one, as we are unable to track attendees who join from a shared conference room or line. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Joseph.
Thanks, Evelyn. Welcome, everyone. My name is Joseph White. I serve as Director of Design Strategy at MillerKnoll, where I'm responsible for developing place design strategies based on our research and real client work. Welcome to the CEU, Redefining the Workplace, Settings for Relationship-Based Work. For IDCEC members, this course provides 0.1 CEU value. Attendees seeking credit with IDCEC must provide an IDCEC identification number on the CEU event attendance record. For AIA members, this course provides 1 CEU value. Attendees seeking credit with AIA must provide an AIA membership number on the CEU attendance record. The content of this presentation is copyrighted by MillerKnoll. In this course, you will learn about the shifts that have organizations thinking about work and workplace in new ways. You'll learn how taking a more relationship-based approach to workplace planning, as opposed to an activity-based approach, considers who needs to be supported and the nature of their interactions. You'll see how being purposeful about supporting these interactions builds culture and a sense of belonging, and you'll explore space typologies or settings that help people, that help organizations support well-being, facilitate connection, and navigate change for individuals, groups, and the broader community. Here are the learning objectives for this course. At the end, you will be able to 1, understand the state of the workplace and the impact of the shift that's underway from a purely activity-based model to a relationship-based model in which the workplace goes beyond supporting work activities and helps strengthen relationships. 2, articulate the framework that supports the 3 levels of interactions within the workplace: community, group, and individual, and how each can support people in produce or exchange and reflect activities. 3, recognize how to design settings that incorporate strategies to help organizations support well-being, facilitate connection, and navigate change while elevating the experience for people, enabling equitable access, and encouraging social interaction. And lastly, 4, implement design considerations to reduce social isolation, strengthen weak ties across organizations, promote belonging, improve ergonomics, and incorporate inclusive design considerations. Let's start with a question. Now that work can happen anywhere, what role does the office play in people's lives? When employees exercise location flexibility, they're free to choose the location, whether that's home, office, or elsewhere, that best supports their work and their goals. This shift and its implications for organizations everywhere has sparked numerous studies in recent years, generating mountains of data. While flexibility remains a priority for employees, that doesn't mean that the office stopped being an important part of the mix. In fact, numerous studies underscore the fact that the office remains important to employees, but its role has changed. We know from research that flexibility has become an expectation among employees, but there's a reason that hybrid workplace policies have outpaced remote-first policies. 81% of employees want location flexibility. However, 67% of employees want location flexibility with access to a physical workplace. According to a report from CBRE, a recent survey found that collaboration spaces get utilized 64% more throughout the day than desks. That same study noted a 25% year-over-year reduction in space allocated for individual desks since 2021, with the balance being reallocated to offer people a more diverse range of support, including spaces for community socialization, immersive team activities, and individual restoration and true focus. More on that a little bit later. So why do employees come to the office? It's not just for collaboration. Of the more than 10,000 desk-based workers surveyed in Feature Forum's last Pulse snapshot, 33% said they come to the office for collaborating. 24% cited building camaraderie. 19% said in-person meetings. 14% are seeking a quiet space to work, and 10% are looking for face time with their managers. Given this dynamic mix of work activities, designing a workplace that will draw people together is more complicated than converting the office into one big community space. What's telling about the previous breakdown of why employees are coming to the office is that most of the reasons cited go beyond completing the basic functional requirements of people's jobs. For years, supporting activity-based work has been, was considered cutting-edge workplace strategy. The value people got from their workplace depended on how well it supported their everyday activities. And while this may still be an appropriate approach for some organizations, more and more employees recognize that something else drives the value of the workplace today. While desk-based workers can perform many of their tasks almost anywhere, relationship building is not one of them. And in survey after survey, we see the growing importance of relationship-based work. Instead of being the only place where employees complete all of their work tasks, the workplace has become the best place for relationship-based work. So what does it look like to plan a workplace to support relationship-based work? A relationship-based approach to workplace planning considers who needs to be supported and the nature of their interactions. This includes everything from purposeful interactions that help move work forward to casual interactions that build culture and a sense of belonging. People cycle through various levels of interaction through any given workday. These levels of interaction can be divided into 3 levels: community, group, and individual. Paying attention to relationships at all 3 levels helps organizations develop the resilience and flexibility necessary to succeed in our increasingly dynamic business environment. At the community level, interaction happens between interaction happens between or among representatives of 2 or more groups that have a relationship with each other. Community settings create touch points where members of different groups can come together around a shared sense of purpose. At the group level, interaction happens between or among 2 or more team members who have a defined relationship. Across any organization, teams interact with each other differently. Some teams are more formal, some are more casual. Some work collaboratively, and some require more individual focus. Group settings support them all, so each team member can find their fit. At the individual level, interaction is less about connecting with others and more about the well-being of each person. What one person needs to find respite or focus can look quite different from what the next person needs. Individual settings pull together the right mix of furnishings to give individuals the space they need to thrive. Let's take this one level deeper. Taking a relationship-based approach to workplace planning does not mean ignoring the types of activities people engage in every day. In fact, we can prioritize the social experience of work and then consider the nature of the activities that communities, groups, and individuals complete through those interactions. Broadly speaking, these can be categorized either as exchange and reflect or produce. Layering these activities across all 3 levels of interaction creates a new matrix of space types recentered around human dynamics within the workplace. These 6 space types provide a framework for redefining the workplace. Community socialization spaces in the upper left strengthen community through informal interactions. Community assembly spaces on the lower left are where people from different groups can work alone or together. Group meeting spaces in the center are where people from the same group can connect and share information, whereas group collaboration spaces help define groups cycle between working alone and together. Note the distinction we're making here between communication and collaboration. Also, if you look at the graphics a little more closely, the white square that you see distributed throughout here represents an object of work or an area of focus in the work. The dots are representing people. In this meeting or communication dynamic, you can see kind of all eyes focused on the work together as one unit. In the collaboration, this is illustrating the coming together and breaking apart of individuals as a unit to drive that work forward. That's the distinction that we're making between communication and collaboration. At the individual level, and this is where I was saying, I used the term true individual focus earlier, we're making a distinction between areas where individuals truly immerse themselves in work to find deep focus, but also restoration, where there's an intentional separation for work to step away and recenter your thoughts and really focus on individual well-being. We know from our research that in order to support these levels of interaction, it's crucial to incorporate strategies in place design that support well-being, connection, and change. These are key areas of impact. We layer this insight with what we know about how space needs to support people at the community, group, and individual level to inform a new strategy for place design. When we look at well-being, at the highest level, well-being can be described as a positive state of being comfortable, healthy, and happy. It comprises a broad range of factors that impact people's experiences physically, psychologically, and socially. Looking at connection, it's crucial to consider how people, it's crucial to consider how place can facilitate connection to both your organization and to your coworkers. We know employees care about coming into the office to build community and camaraderie amongst their teams, as well as to feel connected to the greater organization. With 81% of employees wanting flexibility in where they work, it's imperative that strategies for connection to the organization and each other are considered within a workplace. And lastly, looking at change. In a time when change is the only constant, organizations need to be able to navigate, prepare, and design for change. In today's workplace, flexibility has become an expectation. Flexibility not only in where work gets done, but how. Having autonomy to maneuver between spaces to meet the needs of the individuals and groups using them. Let's continue to drill deeper and look at some examples of settings within each space type, starting at the community level. A quick note before we begin. While space types are much more general and speak to higher level priorities of a space, settings start to feel more real. However, it's important to remember that these settings are not real places. They're merely meant to illustrate a set of insights through one possible solution. A helpful analogy might be to think of each setting as a recipe that can be seasoned to taste. The same insights filtered through the specific needs of a project by the team may inspire a very different solution. Your version of any of these settings will pull in different materials, finishes, textures, and products. That variation is not only encouraged, but expected. Finally, each setting will include 2 slides. An overview that introduces the setting at a high level with a look at the insights that provide the foundation of the setting, and a set of planning strategies to consider when creating each setting as part of your next project. Let's begin with the community setting examples. Cafe settings are ideal for gathering or hosting, often around food and drink. They can help boost belonging, support weak ties, and afford flexibility at the organization level. For belonging, the cafe helps everyone feel connected to the larger organization and its culture by providing spaces that reduce social isolation. Weak ties, under the connection category, are those people across an organization whom we don't know as well or interact with very often. They help us connect to new ideas or opportunities to advance innovation. These relationships are primarily at the community level. Weak ties help people feel welcome, feeding our sense of security and belonging while supporting longer-term purpose-driven outcomes within the organization. And lastly, under change, this setting helps organization embrace change through flexible, multi-use, interconnected spaces that adapt to support people where and when they work. Let's look at the planning strategies for this setting. For well-being, designs that carefully mix open vistas with partially shielded hideaways make it easy for people to find places that meet their needs while encouraging exploration and connection with others. And so when I say that, I'm specifically speaking to these spaces kind of towards the back or along the edge. This is where we can start to create these environments of, a partially shielded hideaway with an open vista. Even using something like a high-backed chair off to the edge can help create a little bit of that sense of protection for people that may be a little more reluctant to dive right into the center, and give them a chance to kind of take a pulse on what's happening. When we move on to the connection strategy, designs that support a range of postures in easily accessible configurations for small groups or individuals welcome people from diverse backgrounds. And for change, the setting provides a social hub that supports a wide range of interactions. Loose furnishings allow for quick adjustments in a matter of minutes, or more extensive reconfigurations by facilities teams, which might take hours or days. Next, let's look at forum settings. These flex to host everything from information sharing to networking events. They can strengthen ergonomic support while facilitating in-person connection and helping organizations increase place design flexibility. Choice about adjacencies, furnishings, and tools within a forum consider the best ergonomic fit for the wide range of people who will use this setting. This setting brings people from different groups together within the same space and encourages the types of face-to-face interactions that allow people to read each other's expressions and body language. These connections help build trust, community, and knowledge through shared experiences. And this setting helps organizations embrace change through flexible, multi-use, interconnected spaces that adapt to support people where and when they work. Let's look at the planning strategies for this forum. For well-being, this setting helps convey a sense of belonging by including seating options that accommodate a broad range of personal needs without having to request special accommodation. So in this seating, we can see both chairs with and without arms, even a completely open ottoman that allows for anyone to quickly be able to find a spot to sit or perch to engage with the group. For connection, activities such as formal presentation or peer-to-peer exchange benefit from offering community members variety and choice in outfield seating areas, while circulation space allows participants easy entry and egress. And for change, the streamlined kit of parts is intuitive and easy to rearrange into a wide array of possible configurations. So you can see in the way that this current setting is configured, there is a kind of presenter audience presentation setup on the back side of this mobile wall. And on this side, it's more configured for a breakout session. This is something that can easily be reconfigured in a matter of minutes by the users of the space. Now let's take a look at some group settings. Conference room settings offer a structured, distraction-free environment for information sharing. They can help advance inclusive design, foster in-person connection, and provide stability for teams to help them embrace change. The design of this setting considers the comfort, health, and safety of everyone who will use it, not just the common majority. It brings teams together and helps them adapt more easily to change by offering a consistent experience that helps reduce disruption and build resiliency. Let's look at the planning strategies involved. For well-being, seating options and ample circulation space ensures that the setting can accommodate a broad range of people, including those who use assistive devices, without separating or stigmatizing anyone. For connection, this setting supports business conversation and presentations for both in-person and remote participants without interruptions or distractions. The square central table with rounded edges eliminates hierarchical seating placement while maintaining access to shared content on display. And for change, conference rooms offer a controlled and consistent environment that delivers a predictable experience through consistent placement of technology and tools. If you remember that diagram earlier with the square and the circles, this is very much that space where all eyes are centered on the topic of work and the conversation in one unified group. Next, let's look at workshops. Workshops provide a flexible setting that is often shared with other teams. It seamlessly supports cycling between group and individual work. They can strengthen autonomy, support strong ties, and enable flexibility for teams. By enabling individual and group choice through adaptable furnishings, a range of work points, and adjustable work tools, this setting helps meet new expectations for schedule and location flexibility. It brings together teammates who interact with each other frequently and know each other well for purposeful group collaboration. This dynamic setting supports a variety of group interactions to help move work forward. Let's look at the planning strategies involved. For well-being, freestanding mobile chairs and tables give individuals control over the sightlines, orientation, and structure of the space around them. For connection, collaboration space supports immersive and diverse activities for both groups and individuals. A range of postures that are easily accessible allow for easy flow into and out of conversations. And for change, a variety of flexible tools and technology makes it seamless to shift from digital to more analog work activities. Next, let's take a look at a couple neighborhood settings. Neighborhood settings are tailored for a defined group, where members can work alone or together. In this case, a group that prioritizes collaboration. Neighborhood settings can boost autonomy, support strong ties, and enable flexibility in team workflow. By enabling individual and group choice through adaptable furnishings, a range of work points, and adjustable work tools, this setting helps meet new expectations for schedule and location flexibility. Because this space is owned by a group or team, the individuals who use it support one another's day-to-day work. For that reason, the design of the setting facilitates collaboration, knowledge sharing, and problem solving. This setting helps teams adapt more easily to change through the ability to reconfigure space. And the planning strategies for this setting. For well-being, the rich variety of options within the setting are easy to read, offering different opportunities for interaction and coordinated efforts. This even tracks through to the application of CMF within the setting, and you can see a clear difference with these pops of yellow and blue in the foreground and off to the right, indicating those moments for collaboration, with the more neutral and subdued tones used for the individual work points in the back. And so within this, you can see this close proximity of being able to cycle between individual and group work, indicating that this team requires a lot of collaboration to move their work forward. When we look at the planning strategies for connection, circulation routes offer niches and other stopping points where people can have quick, spontaneous exchanges of information and ideas. And for change, ownership of team neighborhoods gives permission to group members to adapt the space to best meet their needs. For example, mobile partitions here separating the individual and group space can be rearranged as the group's workflow changes as they move their work forward. Here's another neighborhood setting, in this case for a group that prioritizes focus a little more than collaboration. Let's review the planning strategies involved and why they're different. For well-being, highly adjustable furnishings and ergonomic tools maximize personal comfort for team members who use this setting. For connection, this neighborhood setting facilitates a collegial atmosphere for balancing independent work and interdependent decision-making. And for change, the versatile kit of parts enables multiple configurations, which can support different activities and spatial modes. In this case, seats for more resident workers on the left and more mobile users on the right, or I guess more kind of center of the image. Notice the boundary and docking station for mobile peds on the right. This provides personal storage for remote teammates who may share the lighter scaled work points in the center of the space, giving them a place to store their items, move them over to the desk, move them out of the way in this more kind of shared space. Our final set of settings are optimized for use by individuals. Respite-based settings offer a semi-private setting designed to restore focus and a sense of well-being. They can help support neurodiversity, provide a moment to recenter attention, and give people control over their environment and experience. As we learn more about the impact of aesthetic or sensory signals from the environment, we understand more about the need for settings that provide relief from those sensory signals. This is a key consideration in designing for neurodiversity. Taking time to pause, process information, organize thoughts, and not react emotionally helps people to filter out the noise of work and stay connected to what matters most to them and their organization. This type of setting gives people control over their environment, which helps them adapt to change. The planning strategies involved here for well-being, this calming space invites people to withdraw and momentarily escape from the stresses of work. For connection, this space is intentionally devoid of technology to encourage a restful experience for the mind as well as the body. And for change, small adjustments can be made to the lighting, drapery, and more to enhance individual comfort, while the enclosure itself can be reconfigured as the organization's needs evolve. This is also an interesting setting to look at in that, yes, it provides individual benefit for those within the space that can be tailored with lighting and that drapery and moving the seating around, but it also has a positive impact for those on the outside of the environment. By introducing furnishings like this, you can begin to create some visual separation between areas and start to channel the flow and circulation and general buzz of movement throughout an environment. So by doing that, it provides double benefit, those within and for those without. Next, let's look at the private office. It's a more conventional approach to individual focus. These settings are fully enclosed rooms that are often owned and designed for distraction-free focus. They can provide choice and ergonomic support, facilitate in-person connections, and enable flexibility for individuals. Choices about furnishings and tools within a private office consider the fit for the person who will use this setting. Beyond providing a space to focus for the individual who uses the setting most often, a private office often hosts face-to-face conversations that allow people to read each other's expressions and body language more effectively. This type of setting gives people control over their environment, which helps them adapt to the uncertainty often associated with broader changes. In planning strategies for well-being, this setting features high performance, intuitively adjustable ergonomic furnishings and tools. These include a task chair, height adjustable table, adjustable monitor arms, task lighting, personal storage, and a secondary posture for lounge and conversation. For connection, acoustic and visual privacy supports cognitive processes by minimizing distraction for focused heads-down work. And for change, beyond individual focus, this setting also supports conversation or collaboration between individuals. And our last setting example for today, study halls are larger settings where individuals can work alone together. They can help support neurodiversity, development of weak ties, and offer flexibility for individuals. Not everyone cultivates focus in the same way. It's important to provide options for different individuals, or even the same individual experiencing different states of mind throughout the day. This space is not necessarily owned by a group or team, but the people who use it are drawn to it because of a sense of quiet connection to one another. This type of setting gives people control over their work experience, which helps them adapt to change. And the planning strategies involved. For well-being, a choice of solo work points, all of which offer access to natural light and scenic views to the outside, cultivates a range of states of mind that are conducive for individual work. For connection, this setting satisfies the desire to be together, even while working independently, by providing a quiet place to focus, think, learn, or read within proximity to others. I think we can all think of times when we've sat side by side with someone who is also quietly studying, working through problems, trying to figure something out, and you can feel that momentum as it builds within the group. So this is a real opportunity to introduce a new type of space within the workplace that helps people build those weak ties in a more quiet way. Lastly, when we look at the planning strategies for change, open circulation and opportunities for visual separation help individuals find and sustain their own productive flow. even if that's as simple as a high-backed seat that swivels, allowing an individual to control their field of view, like the ones shown at the left of the image here. So now that you've seen some great examples of how using a relationship-based approach to designing the workplace considers who needs to be supported and the nature of their interactions, let's open it up to discuss the thoughts and challenges that are top of mind for you regarding this information.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. We'll take questions now. I think right now we have one question that's come in, and it should be an interesting one. And I don't know that we'll be able to answer it on this call, but what is the cost comparison for going from the typical workstation plan floor plan to the more collaborative floor plans?
This is a very complex equation to work with. In most cases, what we're seeing is that a lot of organizations have more real estate than they really need right now. And so that starts to free up more resources to reallocate to different types of settings. So there's definitely a balance here in looking at the overall distribution of environments and as well as the utilization that's being realized through those. So in many cases, you can take underutilized portions of a floor plate and start to swap them out with other types of environments. It's really important to do this in a piloting process where you're making that change gradually over time. In many cases, these new types of settings rely on much more sharing of space. So it's less of a dedicated one-to-one allocation. And that's where you start to realize some savings as well in terms of utilizing less space to accommodate more people across a broader range. One of the other really critical considerations within that is that organizations need to invest more time in looking at who's working where and when. And that means providing some guidance on orchestrating which groups show up at certain times throughout the work week. And I've seen this happen in a number of ways. In some instances, teams establish core days or hours where they agree to show up together. And in other more advanced instances, I've actually seen organizations refer to what one called Connect Week, where they were actually looking to bring certain groups that have a kind of functional strategic adjacency together at the same time. If you provide this variety and choice in setting, and you provide flexibility in when and where people work, but don't provide additional guidance, that's where we start to see a lot of underutilization, and you don't see the benefits of that relationship building that can happen with this type of environment.
Awesome. So it looks like we have a number of questions rolling in, Joseph. So one of the questions coming up is, these slides show such generous spaces. We don't usually have that much space available per person. Can these be adapted for more crowded workplace spaces that also need to control sound?
Absolutely. And, I was touching on this a little bit earlier around in a lot of places, space is really underutilized. And we see that a lot when there's a one-to-one kind of dedication of space. And it's really important for organizations to be really transparent and upfront about these changes. There are some really great stats, and I believe I'm going to remember this one correctly. And this came from our partnership with Future Forum. In organizations where people felt they were engaged and the organization was being transparent about workplace change, they were nearly 9 times more satisfied in their job than in organizations that did not prioritize that engagement and weren't being as transparent about the change. So for instance, if an organization says, we've got a lot of one-to-one desk allocation and it's really underutilized, this is not a responsible use of our company's resources. And so we're going to start testing some changes to make better utilization of our resources so that we can be more successful and productive. That's a completely different way of approaching it than just removing the space and cramming people together. But to the question on generous space versus can these be made smaller, 100%. Those are just starting points. I would say that the general function for a lot of these spaces can be met in small, medium, and large space allocation. And it's really critical to consider the adjacencies of these spaces. Not all of them will work in all instances. So you need to really start to consider Those levels of interaction that I was speaking to, that kind of exchange and reflect versus produce, which ones of those require more heads down focus versus which ones are going to be more for that open dialogue and exchange and might be a little bit more buzzy. So you want to pay attention to those spatial adjacencies very critically.
So the next question, do you think businesses are at risk of veering too far from the focused-oriented individual workstations into modern office design?
Yeah, you've really got to keep that in balance. And the thing that is most important here to understand is that everyone's lived experience outside of the office is a bit different. A lot of people have space, particularly in the US, where they can cultivate really great focus at home, but that's not the case for everyone. Some folks live in smaller spaces, may live in a multi-generational house. They may be primary caregivers. It might actually be really difficult for them to find a moment of focus. For some people, the office is that haven. And so it's really important for organizations to get to know their people. And this is something where I think more often than not, organizations will rely on worker personas that are built on job function or job role, much more so than variations in lived experience outside of the office. And that's important because you may have two people who have exactly the same job function, the same job description from an HR standpoint, but one of them may live alone, may live very close to the office. It's really easy for them to get there. And another may have quite a large family where they're a primary caregiver and their commute is rather arduous. Those two people, what support looks like for them when they arrive at the workplace is going to be very different. And so this is kind of a new way of thinking about understanding people and how we design to support them. And finding that balance between individual, group, and community interaction is really something that's going to be unique for each organization based on the character of its people.
Great. So the next question, how have you seen organizations communicate this approach and help users understand the intention? I've noticed users sometimes perceive settings other than individual cubicles and offices as devaluing them as employees.
Interesting. I'm looking at that text again to so there are lots of ways that this can be addressed. And I think the key thing, and one of the things that I didn't mention around the distinction between activity-based and relationship-based work, even if you just look at the words of this, activity-based forwards the activity. It puts that front and center. Relationship-based forwards the people and their relationships front and center. It prioritizes those. So it really starts there around how an organization thinks of and communicates with and about their people. Do they treat them as expendable resources or do they treat them as valuable assets? So language is really, really powerful here. The other thing that I would point to is if you think of a very conventional multi-pack workstation, so say you've got like a 6-pack where there are 6 cubicles, desks physically attached to each other, most organizations will count that as an individual setting. And there's a bit of a disconnect here. The mind does not read it that way. If my desk is physically connected to 5 other desks, upon first glance, the brain perceives that as a group unit, and it really is. And that doesn't mean that workstation in a 6-pack that you can't also do individual work there. But first and foremost, it is prioritizing the proximity to other people. So that is a group dynamic. So when we start introducing new settings, we can do things to say, here's an environment that is for true individual focus or individual respite, which in most cases hasn't really existed in a lot of organizational workplaces. So when we change our language to focus more on the person and their relationships with other people and start to indicate that we understand the complexity and diversity of those relationships and pair those with intentional environments, that really creates a different path of engagement for the employee that starts to illustrate the value that the organization places upon them, as opposed to treating them as an expendable resource that should just be squeezed.
Okay, so the next question from Christopher and Joseph, I know we've had some conversations about this recently. What sort of recommendations do you have for honest communications about the value of physical work space when it comes to return to work policies that may not be appreciated by team members?
There's a lot to unpack there. I'm gonna just kind of dive in with some thoughts that I have around this. So when it comes to return to work or return to office policies, I just want to be very unambiguous here. Mandates don't work, especially if there's nothing behind the mandate. It's very different for an organization to say something like, we're launching a new strategy, or we need to focus more on our customers. You must always lead that communication with the why behind the change. Why are you asking someone to do different in terms of how will that make impact on the business? It's always very, very important to recenter these conversations on the origin of the relationship with the business. When I say that, I mean the moment when the organization posted a job and someone out there raised their hand and said, "Ooh, pick me, I can do that job better than anyone else." That's the point of origin of the relationship. So when we talk about workplace change and workplace support, everything should be contextualized around how that's being put in place to help the individual be successful in the job that they signed up to do. People want to be successful. And so it's really important to frame conversations in workplace change around workplace and, even more importantly, business success. One of the other things that I would point to here, and I know I used the word individual in answering this question, but it's really most effective we've seen to think of the team or the group as the planning unit, much more so than the individual. And this kind of gets back to that notion of relationship-based work and really prioritizing those personal relationships.
Okay, next question. Do you have any advice on how to frame discussions around reducing the physical footprint of these spaces with users? For example, if the administrators at an organization will be reducing the number of private offices, how would you recommend discussing this transition with the actual users of the space?
This is always a kind of a give and get type dynamic. Anytime, and this is kind of building on some of the things that I was saying earlier, anytime you're introducing a workplace change, what is the cause and effect? What is the trade-off? So in a lot of cases I mentioned earlier, if it's reducing space, what are you're in theory regaining some resources, whether that's more space or money that's not being spent on furniture in that space that you're no longer using. What is happening with that additional resource to maintain balance within the organization? So that notion of, are people expendable resources that can be compressed and like maximized, or are they sources of value to be supported? So if you're taking away a private office, what are you offering in return that still respects and recognizes that the status of that individual? That may be something, or other needs that they may have. You can't take away something that is providing a fundamental support or supporting a fundamental need without creating a different pathway. And so the challenge then becomes, how is this different pathway better than what I had before? And in some cases, that might be something where an organization is facing some hard times and they've really got to tighten up. And that may do something like, it saves headcount. Someone gets to keep their job by us all coming together and compressing space. Or it might be something along the lines of, we need to reorganize. We're launching a new strategy. And in order to do that, we need more face-to-face interaction. So the change may be temporary. That's another way to talk about it, is to talk about the duration of the change. All of it comes down to more communication with the workers. And by saying, this is what we hope to achieve as an organization, what are your thoughts around what support looks like? And that can be a back and forth dialogue. But if it's always framed in the context of organizational success, you're going to do much better than if it's in the context of organizational control, which is not going to go very far and not going to end very well.
Okay, so our next question from Lisa. What are your change management strategies for departments in which many individuals insist they must have an office with a door, when you are also trying to find square footage for new collaboration spaces?
That's a great question. And so the best path that I can recommend is to start to look at how each of these departments contribute uniquely to the success of the organization. If they're all doing exactly the same thing, then that may be a bit of a more difficult situation. But if they're all doing something a little bit different, then that starts to open the conversation to why support might look different for one versus another. There are instances where private offices are critical, but in most cases, those have been allocated as a means of conveying status. So starting to think about and be very open about what conferring status looks like within an organization starts to create a pathway to changing that identification. So how might someone who does not have that status recognize that someone else does beyond just allocating square footage in a floor plate? This is something that we've seen in the past where, folks may have more advanced technology tools or different scheduling capabilities, things along those lines. But one of the things that I've used in past communications with clients is for people to think about, what are the demands based on your time? Like, are people seeking out your input and your advice? And if that happens on a regular basis, that's a sign of high status within an organization because of the value that you offer. And that is something that is much more powerful than just a square on a floor plate. So it's really, again, comes back to that dialogue, understanding how each individual and team contributes uniquely to the organization's purpose, and then building those support strategies and making those direct connections between this is who you are and what you're doing, and therefore what support looks like. And that can really go a long way to diffusing those have and have nots type of conversations around someone has that, so I must have it too.
Absolutely. Okay, so next question is, using this new design for the office, have you gathered data back to see how this has worked for clients? And have they seen positive results with employees coming back?
That's a great question. This is something that we've been doing just enough to start putting some language around it. And the key here, and I mentioned this in response to one of the questions earlier, is around piloting. And so what that does is it does multiple things. First and foremost, it really strengthens engagement with the workforce. This provides a very tactical way to engage in dialogue around the best support for different types of teams. And that has amazing benefits in terms of someone's perception on how engaged they feel within the organization and their job satisfaction. And so the other thing that the piloting does is it starts to allow the organization to build their own data set so they can start to benchmark against their own progress as opposed to benchmarking against generic industry standards, which, let's be frank, those generic industry standards really didn't get us to a good place, which is why this big change in thinking and an approach to workplace design is happening in the first place. I was speaking to one of my design mentors recently and was saying that for many years, for decades, executives in corporate real estate were able to hop from job to job to job by basically shrinking desks, fitting more people in less space and saying, I saved the organization X amount of money by doing that. That doesn't work anymore. In order to implement change now, you have to deeply understand your people and your culture and make specific recommendations. And that leads to much more long-term relationships within an organization and allows them to make more wise decisions around workplace change and workplace investment that are, again, tied to that unique purpose and character of the organization and backed by data that is specific to them because they've built that approach from the ground up through a piloting process. So that is really where I would start to target the conversation for a question like that.
Great. So our next question here, are there any specific organizations that you know of who are already planning a space like this well? So I'm guessing they're speaking to relationship-based planning around relationship-based work and starting to really think about these different settings that they could implement.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say that I love referencing this quote. I really enjoy the stories by William Gibson. He's a very famous science fiction author. But the quote is that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed yet. You can see examples of this in a broad range of industries, from financial services to life sciences, to even public utility companies, as well as across global regions. This is a big shift that has really been triggered by the pandemic, which was a global experience that we all went through. And so there are instances of this popping up really across the board.
Okay, next question from Sarah. If you were able to interview or speak with employees at a workplace you're designing, what type of questions can we ask in order to get a full idea of what they need out of the space? Oh, that one's broad.
Yeah. I always start with, what are the top priorities for your organization right now? And if you're a designer and you're asking that question to a broad range of teams and you don't get consistent answers, that is a huge red flag that anything that you do is at high risk of not being successful. So at that moment, it's time to elevate the conversation back to the leadership that you have access to and ask them, what are the top priorities of the organization? And start to try to find ways to get some alignment across those teams so that they all understand what those top priorities are. The next question is, how do you and your teammates uniquely contribute to that purpose? And that's where you can start to understand what informs the design solution, and specifically how the design solution will be unique from team to team to team. So again, diffusing those have and have nots conversations of like, they have this and so I need that too. When you can start to say, I see you on team A, and the unique value that you contribute to the organization is this. So the tailored support for you and your team will most likely look like that. And that can also be a thing that starts to open up that piloting process a little bit and really start to build that engagement. This is much more than a change in the physical shape of the space. This is a change in the engagement of people and how you understand what informs the shape of that space in the first place. So in lots of instances, I'll often recommend that organizations start this process with a change that's relatively well known, that's not controversial, but something that allows you to start to build these new channels of dialogue that don't often exist within the context of an organization, so that a worker can feel heard and then see the action that happens in response to what they shared. And then that way, when you go back and you ask a more difficult question, or you start to approach a more difficult change, you've got a better partner there to work with you and move into that new type of space.
Okay, and I think our last question, at least the last one here so far, as a general guide, are there percentages or ratios that could be attributed to revitalizing a work environment? We've been repurposing existing private offices and client meeting spaces as give back collaborative spaces, plus repurposing the typical lunchroom. However, there's been a hesitation to remove open workstations.
Yeah, I understand the hesitation. There's a lot of deeply ingrained inertia in that. And so a lot of this kind of comes back to challenging those assumptions. I don't really like using broad metrics, but I will give you one in the sake of answering the question. I would say prior to these changes, we were really seeing something, and these numbers are so broad. But we were seeing something along the lines of around 70% of a workplace was devoted to those kind of individual assigned workstations, and really only about 30% was devoted to group interaction and very little to community. So we're starting to see in those spaces, that 30% of kind of group spaces was often shared amongst everyone. And so we're seeing almost a complete inverse of that, where about 70% of the floor plate is dedicated to owned team spaces and shared community spaces, whereas that remaining 30 is really where you're starting to see that more dedicated assigned individual work point. That does not mean that you're actually reducing space for individuals, because within that, in those own team spaces, some of them do have owned individual space that is shared amongst that team. So that idea of the team as the planning unit is really key. I was just communicating with a client last week where they have a team and the individuals only get 15 minutes for their breaks. And this is because of the nature of their work. They're more in kind of a call center type capacity. So they actually don't have time to travel a far distance across a facility to go to some fancy new study hall or one of those other individual settings that I showed. They actually need individual respite spaces that are allocated for that team because their ability to access them is so diminished. So it really does vary, and it all comes back to really engaging and knowing your people more and finding that right fit. I mean, it's, as place designers, we can create places that do anything. If we can't clearly articulate what that place needs to do to begin with, it's going to be very difficult to find a successful result. And if you're not engaging people honestly in dialogue around why places are changing and how that benefits them and the business, it's going to be a very hard road to travel.
Well, Joseph, I think we're just about at the top of the hour. If you take a look at the chat, there's a bunch of people just saying thank you for this fantastic dialogue. I know people are even asking for a part 2 of this session, so very excited to hear that. And I'll drop in the chat just a little bit more information about some of the settings that we discussed today. But thank you so much, and we look forward to our next Design Perspectives.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for all of the questions. Looking forward to engaging more in the future.